The dress wasn't just plain, it was a punishment. Its fabric, a scratchy, dull gray, chafed against her skin with every nervous breath she took. Not only that, it was a declaration for the entire world to see. This one is not like the others. This one is less. Her mother had handed it to her with a look of thin-lipped pity. "It's all we could do, Lisa," she had whispered, her eyes darting away. The words were a lie, of course. Deep down, she knew the truth. This was a choice. Her sisters, shimmering in gowns of sapphire and emerald, had glided past her doorway moments before, their laughter like the chiming of tiny, cruel bells. They smelled of expensive moon-petal perfume and giddy anticipation. Lisa just smelled of soap and fear. Her father appeared in the doorway, a solid wall of disapproval. He was a beta, a powerful man, and his gaze swept over her as if she were a stain on his legacy. "Remember your place," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Back of the hall. No scenes." "Yes, father." Her voice trembled. He didn't offer a single word of comfort. Instead, he just grunted, his eyes already looking past her, toward the glory his other daughters might bring. Maybe it was fate that she was born this way, with a wolf spirit so quiet it was barely a whisper in her soul. A flicker. A defect. Her father had once told her that her spirit was a sad, gray little thing, and she believed him because she had never been given a reason not to. She didn't know what scared her more: the public humiliation to come, or the crushing certainty that she deserved it. With every heartbeat, the dread grew. She had to go. She had to face them. As if pulled by a string, her feet moved, carrying her out of the room and toward the noise, toward the judgment.
The crown felt heavier tonight, or maybe it was just the list of names his council had given him. He stared at the parchment, at the elegant script detailing the bloodlines and political advantages of each high-born female in the kingdom. Vespera, Lyra, Seraphina, names like jewels, cold, hard, and empty. They were prizes, not partners. His advisor, an old wolf named Alistair, cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, Lady Vespera's father holds the Northern Pass. An alliance would be strategic." "I know," Terry cut in, his voice flat. He tossed the scroll onto the massive oak table. The sound echoed in the stone chamber. "My father made a strategic match." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. A loveless union that had left his mother a ghost in her own castle, and his father a bitter, lonely man. Terry would not repeat that mistake. He just wouldn't. Truth be told, he was weary of it all. The bowing, the scraping, the endless political games. They didn't see him, Terry. They saw the Alpha King, a symbol of power to be used, courted, or challenged. So, he had built walls around himself, his authority a shield against their greed. They feared him, which meant he could trust none of them. What he was looking for, he wasn't sure he'd even recognize it. A prophecy whispered by a dying seer spoke of a queen with a silent roar, a key to surviving a coming shadow. But what did that even mean? It sounded like a riddle, a fool's hope. More importantly, he just wanted someone who looked at him and didn't see a crown. Was that too much to ask? He stood, the heavy ceremonial furs settling on his shoulders. "It is time." Alistair bowed low. "May the moon goddess guide your choice, my king." Terry just nodded, his expression grim. As he walked toward the grand hall, he felt no anticipation, only the crushing weight of a choice he didn't want to make.
The moment she stepped into the grand hall, the world became a blur of noise and light. The air thickened with 1,000 competing scents: roast meat, spiced wine, and the cloying perfumes of powerful she-wolves. Laughter and music crashed over her in waves, and she felt her spirit shrink, wanting to crawl back into the safety of her quiet room. Hundreds of eyes seemed to find her all at once, their gazes like tiny, sharp needles. The whispers followed her, slithering through the air. "That's the Beta's daughter. The Omega. Look at her dress. How embarrassing. Why did they even let her come?" No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't block them out. Each word was a fresh cut. Her only goal was survival, to find her table, to become invisible. She found it tucked away in the back, a small round table in a sea of grand, long ones, and beside her seat, another one, empty. A void that screamed her solitude to the entire room. She sat, her back rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. From there, she watched the ceremony begin. She saw powerful alphas claim their mates. She saw joyous unions celebrated with roars of approval. Each one was a reminder of what she was not, what she could never be. Soon after, she noticed Lady Vespera holding court at the high table. She was beautiful, confident, and surrounded by admirers. Vespera's eyes met hers for a fleeting second across the hall, and a slow, cruel smile spread across her perfect lips. In that moment, Lisa felt something stir inside her. Not her wolf, but a cold, hard knot of defiance. It was a tiny, unfamiliar feeling, and it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the usual wave of shame. Still, the memory of that smile lingered, a promise of future pain. The ceremony was almost over. The hall was full of happy couples. Her empty chair was now a glaring beacon of her failure. Just a few more minutes, she told herself. Just endure. But then, the great doors of the hall swung open with a deafening thud, and the world went silent.
He stood in the doorway, letting the silence settle. His presence was a weapon, and he wielded it with practiced ease. Every eye in the hall was on him, a mixture of fear, awe, and desperate hope. His gaze swept the room, gliding over the expectant faces of the highborns. He saw Vespera, her triumphant smile already in place, and he felt nothing. It was like looking at a beautifully carved statue, perfect and completely lifeless. He had felt it just outside the doors. A pull, a faint, almost undetectable hum beneath the noise of the hall, a note of music only his soul could hear. Because of that, he had returned. He wasn't just choosing a mate anymore. He was hunting for the source of that sound. His eyes scanned the crowd, past the glitter and the power, past the main tables, to the back. And then he saw her, a lone girl in a plain gray dress, sitting at a forgotten table. She was trying so hard to be invisible that she practically radiated loneliness. Her head was bowed, but he could feel the frantic, terrified energy coming off her in waves. She wasn't just out of place. She was a different species entirely from the preening peacocks at the front. And the hum, the quiet, beautiful music, it was coming from her. Without thinking, his body moved on instinct. He started walking. He ignored the gasps. He ignored Alistair's shocked hiss from behind him. He walked past the high table where Vespera's smile had frozen and shattered. With every step he took, the hum grew stronger, resonating deep in his bones, a feeling of coming home he hadn't realized he was missing his entire life. The prophecy of a silent roar echoed in his mind, and for the first time, it felt less like a riddle and more like a map. He stopped in front of her table. She looked up, her eyes wide with pure, undiluted terror. And in the quiet that followed as the entire world held its breath, Terry pulled out the empty chair beside her and sat. And just like that, everything changed.
Time stood still. The entire world, all the noise, all the music, all the whispers, it all just stopped. In the span of a breath, the universe had shrunk to the space between her and the Alpha King. He sat beside her, a mountain of silent power, and his presence was so immense it felt like it was stealing the air from her lungs. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the roaring silence. But then, the silence broke. It started with a single, shocked gasp from the high table. A beat later, it was a hiss from somewhere else. Soon after, a low, ugly murmur swept through the hall like a plague, a sound of 1,000 wolves trying to whisper and roar all at once. The moment their eyes locked just for a second, she saw something in his golden gaze. Not pity, not cruelty, but a calm, terrifying certainty. Without warning, he moved. He didn't touch her, but his hand settled on the table near her own, a breath away. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. A claim. The air thickened, and with his scent in the air, a wild, clean smell of pine and winter storms, her own wolf, the quiet, pathetic thing she always tried to ignore, stirred with a feeling she had never known. "He dares?" a voice hissed from a nearby table. It was Vespera. She was on her feet, her beautiful face twisted into a mask of pure fury. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the table. "He chooses that?" Lisa flinched, expecting the king to rise, to laugh, to admit the joke was over. Instead, Terry slowly turned his head, his gaze pinning Vespera where she stood. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The sheer, undiluted power that rolled off him was enough. It was a promise of absolute annihilation. Vespera froze, her mouth snapping shut, and a tremor of real fear passed through her. Just like that, the most powerful daughter in the kingdom was silenced. As if fate demanded it, he then turned his attention back to Lisa, his expression softening just enough to be even more confusing.
The chaos was predictable. He had known this would happen. The shock, the outrage. It was the sound of a world breaking, of a hierarchy being shattered. He let it wash over him, feeling the waves of their fury crash against the shores of his resolve. It didn't matter. What mattered was the terrified girl beside him, trembling like a leaf in a storm. He felt a fierce primal surge of protectiveness so strong it nearly made him growl. This was right. His soul knew it. The prophecy knew it. He saw Vespera rise, and he met her rage with the cold calm of his authority. She was a product of the system he despised, ambitious, cruel, and utterly transparent. Silencing her was easy. But then, there was the much harder part. Beneath the moonlight that streamed through the high windows, he saw the truth in Lisa's eyes. She wasn't just scared of them, she was scared of him. And worse, she was terrified of herself. She genuinely believed what Vespera had said. She believed she was a that. The prophecy had spoken of a silent roar, and in that moment, he understood it a little better. It wasn't about a hidden power, not yet. It was about the silent scream of a spirit that had been told its entire life it had no voice. Because of that, he knew he couldn't just claim her. He had to convince her she was worth claiming. He gave a subtle, almost invisible nod to the captain of his royal guard standing near the doors. The man understood immediately. At the same time, he leaned just slightly toward Lisa, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. "Breathe," he said. The word was a command, but it was gentle. He saw her breath catch, her eyes wide with a new kind of panic as his guards began to move purposefully through the stunned crowd. Their destination, her table. Her lonely, forgotten table.
"Breathe." The king's voice was so low, so close it vibrated through her bones. Her body moved on instinct, taking a shaky, ragged gasp of air. But then she saw them. Two massive guards in the king's black and silver armor were walking toward her. Toward her. Oh gods, she was being arrested. She had done something wrong. She had broken some rule she didn't even know existed. And now she was going to be dragged away in front of everyone. The humiliation she'd felt before was nothing. This was a nightmare. This was the end. Her thoughts spun. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't do anything, I swear." Before she could move, the guards were there. They didn't grab her. They didn't put her in chains. Instead, one of them bowed his head slightly. "My lady," the guard said, his voice respectful. "The king has requested we escort you to the royal wing." "My lady?" The words didn't make sense. Her gaze shot from the guard to the king, then to her family's table. Her father looked pale with shock. Her mother looked like she was about to faint, and her sisters just stared, their mouths hanging open. Then she saw Vespera. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold reptilian hatred. Vespera's eyes burned into her, and in their depths, Lisa saw a promise. It was a promise of pain, of a war she had never asked for. Without another word, one guard stood behind her chair and pulled it out. As if in a trance, Lisa stood up. The whole world was watching. As the guards led her away from the table, a path cleared through the crowd. No one dared get in the way of the king's guards. She felt like a lamb being led to the slaughter, the silence of the court a crushing weight on her shoulders. Her world tilted. The familiar hall, the place of her shame, now seemed like a strange, distant land she was leaving forever. Which meant she was trapped.
He watched her go. He watched the way she walked, her shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow at any moment. He saw the hatred in Vespera's eyes and made a mental note. She and her family would need to be watched. Closely. To make things worse, he knew that by removing Lisa from the hall, he had isolated her completely, making her dependent on him, the very source of her terror. It was a necessary cruelty. As soon as she was gone, he stood up. The murmuring stopped instantly. "The ceremony is over," he declared, his voice booming through the hall, leaving no room for argument. "My choice has been made." He turned and strode from the room without a backward glance, leaving a firestorm of political chaos in his wake. He didn't care. Moments later, he entered his private study through a hidden door. Lisa was standing in the middle of the room, looking small and lost next to the towering bookshelves and the roaring fire. The two guards who had escorted her stood like statues by the main door. He dismissed them with a flick of his wrist. The heavy door clicked shut, plunging the room into a thick, intimidating silence. She flinched at the sound, wrapping her arms around herself. Her chest ached just looking at her. Finally, she found her voice. "Your Majesty," she started, her voice barely a whisper. "Please. There has been a mistake. A terrible mistake." "There has been no mistake," he said, keeping his voice soft. "But you don't understand," she cried, desperation making her bold. I'm nobody. I'm an Omega. My wolf is weak. My bloodline is nothing special. I'm not enough." He walked slowly toward her. He could smell her fear, a sharp, clean scent that twisted his insides. He stopped a few feet away. Under the weight of his stare, she trembled, but she didn't look away. "I am the Alpha King," he said, his voice resonating with a power that had nothing to do with shouting. "My senses are sharper than any wolf in this kingdom. My soul knows things my mind does not, and when I look at you, I do not see weakness." Before the words left her lips to argue again, he reached out and gently touched the back of her hand with his fingertips. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, the world exploded. A jolt, pure energy, white-hot and singing with life, shot up her arm, straight to her heart. She gasped, stumbling back. The air crackled. He felt it too, a shockwave that went straight to his core, confirming everything his instincts had screamed at him. It was the mate bond, dormant and hidden, now roaring to life. And in the stillness that followed, he knew with absolute certainty he had just found his queen.
The jolt was like lightning. It seared a path from her hand straight to her soul, hot and white and terrifying. Her breath caught, and she snatched her hand back as if his touch had been a flame. Her bones remembered him. The spot where his fingers had grazed her skin tingled, a strange phantom heat that felt like a brand. Her thoughts spun, and her world, which had already tilted, now felt like it was flipping completely upside down. He had felt it too. She saw it in the way his golden eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a crack in his kingly composure. Something inside her shifted, a deep, primal part of her that had been asleep her whole life. And she let it happen, because she was too shocked to fight it. What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The space between them burned with a new energy, something ancient and wild. "That," Terry said, his voice a low, rumbling thing that seemed to shake the very air, "is the truth." Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and called for his most trusted servant, an older she-wolf with kind, tired eyes named Alara. "Alara will show you to your chambers. Get some rest." It was a dismissal. Soon after, she was following Alara through a maze of lavish corridors. The palace was a gilded cage, beautiful and terrifying. Each tapestry on the wall seemed to have eyes that watched her, and the polished marble floors reflected a ghostly, pale version of herself she didn't recognize. Alara led her to a set of enormous double doors and pushed them open. The chambers inside were bigger than her entire family's cottage. A huge bed with silks the color of cream, a fireplace crackling with a warm, inviting blaze, and a balcony that overlooked the moonlit royal gardens. It was a fairy tale, and it felt like a prison. Without another word, Alara bowed and left, the click of the closing door sealing Lisa in. She was alone. Truly alone. She walked over to the bed and touched the silken sheets. They were impossibly soft, a world away from the rough, spun wool she was used to. A beat later, 2 handmaidens entered without knocking. They were young, pretty, and their smiles didn't reach their eyes. "My lady," one of them said, her voice polite but as cold as ice. "We are here to help you prepare for bed." Their movements were efficient, impersonal, as they laid out a nightgown of fine linen. They moved around her as if she were a doll, their polite silence a thick wall she couldn't break through. In their eyes, she saw the truth. She wasn't their queen. She was an oddity, a mistake. And as she finally lay in that enormous, empty bed, the phantom heat still tingling on her hand, she had never felt more alone in her entire life.
He stood in his study long after she was gone, the echo of the bond's awakening still thrumming through his veins. His soul answered. The jolt had been more powerful than he could have ever imagined, a raw, untamed magic that confirmed his every instinct. She was the one. The prophecy, the pull, the music only he could hear. It was all real, and it was all terrifyingly fragile. He saw her face in his mind, the way her eyes had widened with fear, not wonder. To make things worse, he knew he had just thrown her into a pit of vipers with no armor and no weapon. He had seen the way the court looked at her. They would not see a queen. They would see a weakness to be exploited. His first move had been to summon the captain of the guard. "The girl, Lisa," he had commanded, his voice hard as steel. "She is to be protected at all costs. No one enters her chambers without my permission. No one speaks to her without a guard present. Understand?" "Yes, Your Majesty," the captain had said, his face grim. He knew what this meant. A political war had just been declared. But then, Terry knew that guards couldn't protect her from everything. The deepest wounds wouldn't come from swords but from whispers, from smiles that hid daggers. He needed someone on the inside, someone to guide her, to teach her. But who could he trust? The court was a tangled web of alliances and ancient grudges. As if summoned by the thought, an idea came to him. It was a risk, a huge one. But it might be the only way. He sent for Lady Anya, a distant cousin of his, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue. He would give her a simple task, teach Lisa the ways of the court. He hoped her loyalty to him would outweigh her ambition. It was a hope he clung to as he stared into the fire, the weight of his kingdom, and now her safety, resting squarely on his shoulders.
Come morning, a new woman appeared at her door. She was tall, elegant, and had a smile that was both dazzling and dangerous. "Lady Lisa," she said, sweeping into the room in a gown of dark red silk. "I am Lady Anya. The king has asked me to assist you in your transition." Anya's presence was overwhelming. She moved with a liquid grace, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The assistance began immediately. "Now," Anya said, her tone light and breezy, "let's start with the basics of court etiquette. You must learn who to bow to and how low. A duchess, for instance, requires a slight inclination of the head, while a visiting alpha requires a full curtsy. It's all very simple, really." But it wasn't simple. It was a dizzying maze of rules designed to trip her up. Anya's lesson felt more like an interrogation. She'd ask about pact treaties Lisa had never heard of, or historical figures she had never studied. With every question Lisa couldn't answer, Anya would sigh, a delicate, disappointed sound. "Oh, you poor thing," she'd say, patting Lisa's hand. "It's not your fault, of course. You were simply never taught." Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, reinforcing the one thing Lisa already believed with all her heart: you don't belong here. The afternoon wore on like a slow, deliberate torture. The climax of the lesson came when Anya was showing her the formal dining settings. "And this tiny fork," Anya explained, picking it up, "is for the sea snails, a delicacy. You must know how to eat them without looking, well, common." Her eyes glinted. As the silence stretched, Lisa felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She had never even seen the sea, let alone eaten snails from it. She just stared at the fork, her mind blank. Anya's smile tightened. "I see we have our work cut out for us," she murmured. "We'll have to be especially prepared for the formal dinner with the royal council tonight. The king insists you attend." The words hit Lisa like a physical blow. A dinner. With the council. Tonight. Her breath caught. No, she couldn't. Before the words left her lips to protest, Anya was already gliding toward the door. "Wear the blue gown," she called over her shoulder. "It will bring out the innocence in your eyes." And then she was gone, leaving Lisa standing alone, her heart pounding with a fresh wave of pure, unadulterated terror. The real test was about to begin. The humiliation from the dinner was a physical thing, a sickness that churned in her stomach. Back in the cold safety of her chambers, she had peeled off the beautiful blue gown as if it were on fire. Now, dressed again in a simple tunic, she stared at the girl in the mirror, a pale, frightened ghost. They had all seen her for what she was, an imposter, a fraud, a worthless Omega girl playing dress-up in a queen's castle. Deep down, she knew the truth. She was going to destroy him. This powerful, magnificent king had made one mistake. Her, and his enemies were going to tear him apart for it. Her chest ached with a pain that was sharper than shame. It was guilt. The door opened without a knock. It was Terry. His face was a thundercloud, his jaw tight with a controlled fury that made her want to shrink into the floor. In that moment, she didn't know what scared her more, his anger or the devastating pull she felt toward him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words tumbling out. "I'm so sorry. You were right to be angry. Please, just send me away. Send me home before I ruin everything for you, before they use me to hurt you." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping right in front of her. The sheer force of his presence was overwhelming. "Do you think I am so weak?" he growled, his voice a low vibration that shook her to the core. "Do you think their pathetic little word games matter to me?" "They matter if they make you look foolish," she cried, tears finally welling in her eyes. "I am making you look foolish." "No," he said, his voice softening just a little. "You are making them look like the cruel, power-hungry sycophants they are." He lifted a hand, and her body moved on instinct, flinching back. His expression tightened with a flash of pain. Very slowly, as if approaching a terrified animal, he reached out again and gently cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear. "Their words are wind, Lisa. I care what you think, and you think you are worthless. That is the only poison in this room." As the silence stretched, the anger in the air dissolved, replaced by something else, something thick and hot. The bond pulsed between them, a silent song of want. Her pulse raced with every breath he took. His gaze dropped to her lips, and the world seemed to narrow to just the space between them. He leaned in, closer, closer. His scent was all she could think about. "My lady?" A smooth voice cut through the tension like a knife. They sprang apart. Lady Anya stood in the doorway, an eyebrow raised in polite inquiry, her eyes gleaming with a triumphant light that made Lisa's blood run cold. She had seen. And just like that, everything changed.
The moment Anya's voice shattered the spell, Terry felt a surge of cold fury. Her timing was too perfect, her expression too innocent. He was a king who had survived on his instincts, and his instincts were screaming that this woman was a snake. He had put a viper in the den with the one person he was trying to protect. What a fool he'd been. He gave Anya a look that promised a later reckoning before turning his attention back to Lisa. But the moment was broken. She had pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself again, her face pale with a fresh wave of horror and shame. He had pushed her too fast. In his desire to show her she was wanted, he had only made her feel more exposed, more trapped. He had to give her space, but the political wolves were already circling. The next day, a new crisis erupted. A visiting delegate, Lord Kale from the Stone River Pack, was demanding a formal audience. He was claiming that Terry's chosen mate had publicly insulted his pack's honor. It was a grave accusation, one that could shatter the fragile neutrality between their territories. As Terry sat on his throne listening to Kale's stiff, formal complaint, he knew this was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated attack. He managed the situation with a careful blend of kingly authority and diplomatic platitudes, promising a full investigation. But his mind was racing. Kale was proud, but not a liar. Which meant Lisa had said something, but she was not malicious. Which meant she had been manipulated. His gaze swept the assembled court and landed on Lady Vespera, who was watching the proceedings with an expression of deep, feigned concern. And standing just behind her was Lady Anya. The pieces clicked into place. Because of that, a cold dread settled in his gut. This was Vespera's next move, and it was brilliant. She wasn't attacking him. She was using Lisa to make him appear weak, a king unable to control his own mate, a ruler whose judgment could not be trusted. To make things worse, he now had to confront Lisa, and he had no idea how to do it without terrifying her further and driving her even deeper into her shell. He was caught in a trap, and Lisa was the bait.
Anya had been so convincing. "You mustn't hide away, my lady," she had chirped that morning. "It will show them they have won. A walk in the gardens will do you a world of good." Lisa, desperate to do something right for a change, had agreed. The air was fresh, and for a few moments she had felt a flicker of peace, but then Anya had guided her down a path that intersected with another, and on that path were Lady Vespera and a grim-faced alpha who looked like he was carved from stone. Vespera had smiled her cruel smile. "Ah, the little Omega," she'd said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Still here? I'm surprised the king hasn't tired of his charity case." The insult stung, but it was the memory of Terry's voice, "Their words are wind," that made her lift her chin. "The king is not so fickle as you are, my lady," Lisa had replied, her voice quiet but steady. Vespera's eyes flashed. "And what would you know of kings, or honor?" She then turned to the grim-faced lord. "Lord Kale, you see what we contend with? This is the creature our king would place beside him, one who has no respect for our ways." "My pack values strength and loyalty," Lisa had said, her own anger surprising her. "Not cruelty dressed up in silk." And that was it. Vespera had gasped, feigning shock. Lord Kale's face had darkened with rage. "You dare insult my pack's values?" he had snarled. "You imply we are cruel?" Before Lisa could explain, he had turned on his heel and stormed away. Vespera had given her a look of pure, cold victory. As the truth unraveled, Lisa realized she had walked right into a perfectly laid trap. Now she stood before Terry in the council chamber. He had summoned her after his meeting with Kale. The room was empty except for them, but it felt crowded with his silent, simmering anger. "What did you say to him?" he demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. I didn't mean," she stammered, trying to explain about Vespera, about the trap. But he cut her off, his patience gone. "I am trying to keep this kingdom from fracturing, and you are starting feuds with neighboring alphas." He wasn't yelling, which was somehow worse. His voice was raw with stress and frustration. As if the world narrowed, all she could hear was his disappointment. All she could see was his anger. "I didn't—" "Enough," he said, holding up a hand. The word was a hammer blow. He turned away from her, running a hand through his hair. The weight of his crown seemed to be crushing him. "Just go to your rooms, stay there, and do not speak to anyone until I tell you to." He didn't look at her as he said it. He couldn't. And that was the worst part. He couldn't even look at her. The one person who had seen something in her now saw a liability, a problem, a curse. And as she walked from the chamber, her body numb, a cold, dark certainty settled in her heart. She hadn't just failed. She had broken the one person who had tried to save her. His words were ghosts that haunted the silent, luxurious room. "Stay there. Don't speak to anyone." He couldn't even look at her. The memory was a fresh wound, and shame was the salt being rubbed into it. She curled up on a chaise lounge by the window, watching the sky darken, feeling a despair so complete it was like drowning. Every terrible thing her father had ever said, every whisper she had ever heard, every scornful look she had ever received. It was all true. She was a curse, a walking disaster. For hours, she just drifted in that misery. Maybe it was fate. She should just find a way to run, to disappear. That would be the kindest thing she could do for him. Let him find a real queen, someone strong and worthy like Vespera. Her chest ached at the thought, a sharp, physical pain. But then, something else pushed through the fog of her despair. It was the memory of Vespera's face in the garden, that look of cold, calculated victory. It wasn't just that Lisa had failed, it was that Vespera had enjoyed it. Vespera had played her like a fiddle, had used her weakness and her past to weave a trap, and she, Lisa, had walked right into it. Deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't her fault. Not really. She had been foolish, yes. Naive, absolutely. But she was not cruel. She was not a liar. And a tiny, fierce spark of anger began to glow in the cold emptiness of her heart. The bond pulsed on her hand, a faint warmth, a reminder of that single moment in his study when he had looked at her and seen something other than a mistake. Something inside her shifted. The fear was still there, a cold snake in her belly. But now it had company, resolve. She would not run. She would not be his weakness. Rather, she would find a way to be his strength, even if he hated her for it. She had to fix this. No matter how hard she tried to be invisible before, now she had to find a way to be seen, to be heard, and to expose the truth.
The council chamber felt like a cage full of snarling wolves, and he was the keeper who had lost control. Lord Kale had finally been placated with a promise of a formal apology and a trade concession, a humiliating price to pay for a manufactured insult. His council was in an uproar. "The Omega is a liability," one old duke had roared. "She will be the end of you, of all of us." Terry had let them rage. He sat on his throne, his face an unreadable mask of stone, but inside, a storm was brewing. He had replayed the scene with Lisa over and over in his mind. The raw stress, the political pressure. He had let it boil over and had scalded her with it. The image of her face, crumbling in despair as he dismissed her, was a knife twisting in his gut. He had done to her exactly what her family had always done. He had made her feel worthless and small. He had become the very thing he despised. As a result, his focus shifted. The political problem was just a symptom. The disease was in his own court. Vespera, Anya. He knew they were behind it. What he needed was proof. That's why he had sent a quiet summons to his spy master, a shadowy wolf who moved through the castle unseen. "Watch Lady Vespera," he had commanded. "Watch Lady Anya. I want to know who they speak to, where they go. I want to know every breath they take." His duty was to his kingdom, yes, but the bond was a chain around his soul, and it was pulling him toward her. He had to protect his kingdom and his mate. He just didn't know how. As he sat there torn between his crown and his heart, He felt a faint, urgent pulse through the bond, a spike of pure, unadulterated fear coming from her. His head snapped up. Something was wrong.
The guards outside her door were stone. They bowed respectfully but refused to let her pass. "The king's orders, my lady." It was a polite prison. Desperation clawed at her. By the time her evening meal arrived, delivered by the kind-eyed servant Alara, Lisa had a plan, a terrifying, risky plan. "Alara," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I need your help. Lady Vespera. She lied. She set a trap for me in the garden. There was a witness, a young garden hand. I need to find him." Alara's face was a mixture of fear and sympathy. To conspire against the king's orders was a death sentence. But then she looked at Lisa's face, at the desperate resolve in her eyes. "The court has been cruel to the forgotten ones for too long," Alara murmured, making her decision. "Come. We will use the servants' passages. We must be quick." The hidden corridors were dark and narrow, smelling of dust and secrets. Alara led her to the lower levels, to the small shared room of the garden apprentices. They found him, a boy no older than 16, with dirt under his fingernails and fear in his eyes. At first, he refused to speak, but Lisa talked to him not as a future queen, but as someone who also knew what it was like to be small and overlooked. And so, he told her. He had heard Lady Vespera talking to Anya just before, planning to put the Omega in her place. It was proof. Real proof. A surge of triumphant hope flooded through Lisa. "Thank you," she breathed, her heart soaring. Maybe she could fix this. Maybe Terry wouldn't have to hate her. As she turned to leave with Alara, her hope froze in her veins. At the far end of the dim corridor, leaning against the stone wall, was Lady Anya. Her sweet smile was gone, replaced by a look as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. She didn't say a word. She just watched them, her eyes promising a terrible retribution. Without another word, Anya turned and vanished into the shadows. "We must go, now!" Alara hissed, grabbing Lisa's arm. They scrambled back into the passages, Alara leading them on a different, more secluded route. "This way," she urged. "It crosses the old gallery. It will be empty at this hour." The gallery was a high, arched wooden bridge that overlooked the dark, empty training yard. Lisa's heart hammered in her chest as she hurried across the worn planks, the boy's testimony a precious, dangerous secret. She heard it before she felt it, a single sharp crack. Without warning, the wooden railing beside her exploded into splinters. The world pitched sideways. A scream tore from her throat as her feet slipped, her body lurching into the empty air. She was falling. The cobblestones of the yard rushed up to meet her in the darkness. But then, a shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the yard below. It was a blur of black fur and impossible speed, a living projectile of pure, primal fury. And as the wind roared in her ears, the last thing she saw was a pair of blazing golden eyes. Air screamed past her ears. The world was a blur of stone and shadow, rushing up to claim her. Her body was weightless, her mind a silent shriek of pure terror. This is it. This is the end. A life of shame, ending in a lonely, broken fall. The irony was so bitter it almost made her laugh. But then, impact. Not the hard final crash of cobblestone she expected, but something else. Something solid, and warm, and alive. A sickening crack echoed in the night, a sound of bone splintering under immense force. Her world tumbled, a chaotic mess of fur and momentum, and she landed hard on the ground, the breath knocked from her lungs. She was bruised, she was shaking, but she was alive. Her thoughts spun. A few feet away, a massive black wolf lay whimpering on the stones, its great body shuddering. One of its front legs was twisted at a horribly unnatural angle. Its golden eyes, blazing with agony, found hers. And her heart stopped. Terry. Before she could move, guards were swarming the courtyard, their shouts echoing off the walls. Torches flared, casting flickering, demonic shadows. In that hellish light, she watched in absolute horror as the wolf's form began to warp. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't beautiful. It was agony. Bones snapped and reformed with wet, tearing sounds, and a raw, choked scream of pain ripped through the air, a sound that was half wolf, half man. In the span of a breath, the wolf was gone, and in its place lay Terry, naked and trembling on the cold stones, his face chalk white with pain. His arm, oh gods, his arm was bent all wrong, the bone clearly shattered. He tried to push himself up, his gaze locked on her, a question in his eyes. Are you safe? Even as a wave of pain sent him collapsing back to the ground. And in that moment, seeing him broken on the stones for her, the last of her own pain vanished, replaced by a new soul-crushing agony.
Pain. White-hot, blinding pain. It was a fire in his bones, radiating from his shattered leg and shoulder, where he'd absorbed the impact of her fall. The shift back to human form had been a new kind of hell, every sinew and bone screaming in protest. But none of it mattered. As his guards helped him to his feet, his eyes were only on her. She was alive. Bruised, terrified, but alive. That was the only thought that pierced through the fog of agony. He had saved her. The royal healers were a whirlwind of activity, forcing pungent potions down his throat that dulled the pain to a throbbing, manageable roar. They set the bones, a brutal, grinding process that made him roar in a way that had nothing to do with being an alpha king. But as they worked, his mind was already racing, piecing together the events. The broken railing, Anya's presence in the servants' corridor. This was not an accident. This was an assassination attempt. Vespera had finally shown her hand. But what's worse, he realized, was that Vespera was smarter than he'd given her credit for. She wouldn't leave loose ends. As soon as he could think clearly, he sent his spy master to secure the garden hand, the boy who was Lisa's only witness. He had to protect him. The spy master returned hours later, his face a grim mask. Terry knew the news was bad before the man even spoke. The boy is gone, Your Majesty. Gone? What do you mean, gone? Terry snarled, trying to sit up, the movement sending a fresh wave of fire through his shoulder. His family was given a pouch heavy with gold and a fast horse. They left the city before dawn, the spy master reported. But before he left, he was brought before a select group of the council. He told them Lady Lisa threatened his family to make him lie for her. The words landed like stones. The proof wasn't just gone. It had been twisted into a dagger and plunged right into Lisa's back. To make things worse, a new story was already taking root in the castle's fertile ground of gossip. The unstable Omega, they were whispering, racked with guilt over her lies, had thrown herself from the gallery. And their noble king, they sighed, had nearly been killed, trying to save her from her own madness.
She sat on the edge of her bed, numb. Ilara, her face pale with fear, had told her everything. The garden hand was gone. The story had been changed. And now, the whole castle thought she was insane. A suicidal, hysterical Omega who was a danger to herself and everyone around her. It was a perfect trap. A lie so brilliant, so cruel, that it was impossible to fight. How do you prove you're not crazy when the whole world has already decided you are? A few days passed in a silent, lonely haze. Her minor bruises faded, but the wound inside her only grew deeper. Finally, he came. Terry walked into her room, his arm bound in a tight sling, his face etched with exhaustion. The dynamic energy that always surrounded him was muted, dimmed by pain and political pressure. He didn't come close. He just stood by the door, the space between them a vast, empty canyon. "The council is demanding I send you away," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth she remembered. "They say you are unstable, a threat to the crown." Her heart shattered. So, he believed it too. Or at least, a part of him did. "And what do you say?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. I told them no. But there was no victory in his words. He looked so tired, so defeated. Listen to me, Lisa. It is not safe for you. Vespera, she will not stop. What happened on the gallery, that was not an accident. I know, she said. They will not succeed in killing you, he continued, his voice hardening. I will not let them. He took a breath, and the next words came out heavy, like stones. For now, you are to be placed under protective custody. The royal guard will be stationed outside your door. No one comes in, and you do not go out. It is the only way I can guarantee your safety. Her blood ran cold. Protective custody. He was locking her up. He was putting her in a cage, not to protect her from them, but to protect his kingdom from her. The unstable Omega, the problem that needed to be managed. He looked at her then, his golden eyes full of a pain she couldn't decipher. It looked like pity, and that was the final blow. Before either could speak, he turned and walked away, leaving her with the quiet click of the door and the heavy thud of a bar sliding into place on the other side. The silence roared, and in the quiet that followed, she finally let the last of her fight die. They had won. She had tried to be brave, and she had gotten him hurt. She had tried to find the truth, and she had been branded a liar and a lunatic. She curled up on the bed, the cold of the empty room seeping into her bones. He almost died for her, and she had given him nothing but trouble in return. Her core flaw screamed the terrible final truth. She wasn't just a curse. She was a poison, and all he had done was drink. The silence of the room was a living thing. It breathed with her, a slow, steady rhythm of despair. Days bled into one another, marked only by the changing light outside her window and the silent delivery of food trays she barely touched. The fight had left her. The anger, the brief spark of resolve, it had all been smothered by the heavy, crushing weight of his final words. Protective custody. He had caged her. She was a problem he had to contain. Her heart, which had started to feel a foolish, fluttering hope, was now just a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Then, one evening, Alara came with her tray. The older she-wolf's face was etched with a worry that went deeper than usual. After she placed the food down, she didn't leave. Instead, she moved to the door, listening for a long moment before turning back to Lisa, her expression fierce. "My lady," she whispered, her voice a low, urgent hum. "I do not believe them. I don't care what that boy said or what the whole court whispers. I was there in the passage. I saw your face. You are not a liar, and you are not mad." The words, they were the first kind thing Lisa had heard in what felt like a lifetime. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. Just one person. That's all it took. One person's faith to make a crack in the wall of her despair. "It doesn't matter, Alara," Lisa whispered back, her voice hoarse from disuse. "There's no proof. It's my word against theirs." Alara's eyes darted around the room, and she leaned in closer, her next words changing everything. "What if there is other proof?" she breathed. "Proof of something much worse." Her voice dropped even lower. "Lady Vespera. She is a traitor. She receives secret letters from the Shadow Ridge Pack, our sworn enemies. I've seen the messenger, a sorcerer who cloaks the scrolls in dark magic so the guards can't detect them. She is plotting against the king." As the truth unraveled, the cold stone in Lisa's chest began to burn. Treason. This wasn't just about a rivalry anymore. This was about the fate of the entire kingdom, and she, the caged Omega, was the only one who knew.
His injured arm was a constant throbbing reminder of his failure. Every day was a battle on two fronts. In the council chamber, he fought a political war against the whispers and veiled accusations of his own lords. In his own mind, he fought a war against the guilt that was eating him alive. He had locked her away. He had told himself it was to protect her, but was that the whole truth? Or was he also protecting his own rule from the chaos she seemed to create? The thought was a poison of its own. He sat in his study staring at a map of the territories, the lands of the Shadow Ridge Pack a dark stain on the northern border. He had his spy master digging for proof of Vespera's plots, but they had nothing solid, just rumors and shadows. He was a king with no moves left to make, a warrior with his hands tied. But then it happened. A wave of feeling, so sharp and clear it made him gasp, crashed over him. It was not his own. It was a cold spike of dread, the bitter taste of betrayal, and an image that flashed behind his eyes with perfect clarity. Vespera's face, smiling her cruel, beautiful smile. The feeling was followed by another image, a snarling wolf with a jagged scar across its eye, the personal sigil of the Shadow Ridge Alpha. He shot to his feet, his heart hammering. It was the bond. It was her. She was reaching out to him, screaming a warning without making a sound. Her feelings, her knowledge poured into him through that mystical connection. As if the world narrowed, everything else fell away. The council, the politics, his own self-doubt, it was all just noise. The signal was clear. She knew. She had the proof he needed. And she was telling him Vespera's treason was tied to Shadow Ridge. Without thinking, his body moved on instinct. The weariness, the frustration, it all burned away, replaced by a surge of pure, cold purpose. He knew what he had to do.
After Alara left, a new kind of fear had taken hold. A fear that was sharp and alive. She had this terrible, dangerous knowledge, and she was locked in a cage. What could she do? How could she warn him? She had paced the room for hours, her mind racing. And then, a desperate, impossible idea had formed. The bond. The connection that had terrified her. Maybe it could be her only weapon. She had laid on the bed, her breath coming in short, quick gasps, and she had focused. She'd poured every ounce of her will, her fear, and Alara's discovery into that single, invisible thread that tied her soul to his. She didn't know if it would work. She didn't even know if it was real. She had just prayed. Hours passed. The moon rose high in the sky, painting her room in silver and shadow. Nothing happened. The hope that had flickered within her began to die, and the cold despair started to creep back in. Maybe she really was crazy after all. Maybe she had just imagined it all. But then, she heard it. A faint sound from the hallway. A sound that did not belong to the guards. A quiet, metallic click. The sound of a key sliding into the lock of her door. Her heart skipped. She scrambled off the bed, backing away as the door swung silently open. Terry stood there, his sling gone, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. He looked at her, not with pity, not with anger, but with a fierce, desperate hope that mirrored her own. "I got your message," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. The tension broke, and a shaky, tearful laugh escaped her lips. It worked. He believed her. As the silence stretched, he took a step into the room, his gaze never leaving hers. "The full moon consecration is in 2 nights," he said, his voice dropping lower, filled with a dangerous edge. "The entire kingdom will be there. She will be there, feeling untouchable, ready to receive the pack's blessing." He paused, and in his eyes, she saw the promise of a coming storm. "That is where we will show them what a traitor's blessing truly looks like." He extended his hand to her, not to touch, just an offering, an invitation. "It's time to fight back," he said. And she, the forgotten Omega, the caged girl, the king's poison, she took his hand. The great hall was transformed. Silken banners depicting the silver moon hung from the rafters, and the air was thick with the sacred scents of burning sage and night-blooming moon petal. Every powerful wolf in the kingdom was present, their faces solemn and watchful. Lisa stood beside Terry's throne, not behind it, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She could feel the hundreds of eyes on her, some curious, some hostile. But for the first time, she didn't shrink from their gaze. Her fear was still there, a cold flutter in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective resolve. Tonight, the truth would come out. Or they would all die trying. The ceremony reached its peak. The High Priestess called Lady Vespera forward to receive the pack's blessing, a symbolic affirmation of her family's loyalty. Vespera glided to the center of the hall, a vision in white silk, her face a perfect mask of pious humility. But then, before the blessing could be given, Terry rose. His voice, calm and clear, cut through the sacred silence. "Before we bless a family for their loyalty," he began, his voice ringing with authority, "let us first speak of treason." A collective gasp went through the hall. Vespera turned, her eyes wide with perfectly feigned shock and hurt. "My king," she said, her voice trembling beautifully. "What is the meaning of this? Have you been so poisoned by the lies of this Omega that you would disrupt a holy rite?" "Your lies are at an end, Vespera," Terry said, his voice hard as iron. He gave a sharp nod. From a side entrance, his spy master emerged, dragging a terrified, black-robed man behind him, the sorcerer. The moment Vespera saw him, her mask of innocence shattered. Her face twisted into a snarl of pure, unrestrained fury. Seeing the game was up, she screamed a single, guttural word in a language Lisa didn't understand. Without warning, a dozen figures in the crowd threw off their ceremonial cloaks, revealing the black leather armor and jagged scar sigil of the Shadow Ridge Pack. Assassins. The sacred ceremony erupted into a nightmare of drawn blades and panicked screams. Chaos bloomed. Terry shoved Lisa behind the throne, his body already shifting, bones cracking as the great black wolf burst forth, a roar of fury ripping from its throat. But the assassins were prepared. They moved with deadly precision, ignoring the guards, their only target, the Alpha King. One of them broke through the line, a poisoned dagger raised high, lunging for Terry's exposed flank. Her heart skipped. Time stood still. There was no time to think. Her body moved on instinct. A scream built in her throat, a desperate cry to warn him, but no sound came out. Instead, something else erupted from her. A wave of silent, shimmering silver energy, invisible to the eye but utterly overwhelming to the soul. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling. It was the crushing weight of every moment of pain she had ever endured, and the fierce burning light of every moment of love she had ever felt for him, all unleashed at once. The assassins faltered. Their killing rage vanished, replaced by a sudden, jarring confusion. Their blades lowered, their eyes going glassy and lost. As if the world narrowed, the silent roar of her Omega spirit had not deafened them, but had instead filled them with a sorrow so profound they could no longer fight. It was the opening Terry's guards needed, and in the span of a breath, the battle was over.
The rage of the wolf was a fire in his veins, but even as he fought, he felt it. A wave of pure, unadulterated feeling that washed over the hall. It was her. It was her spirit, her pain, her strength, her love. It was the most powerful thing he had ever felt. He watched, stunned, as his enemies were brought to their knees not by tooth and claw, but by the overwhelming force of her heart. The aftermath was a mess of shouting guards, whimpering assassins, and the stunned silence of his entire court. Vespera, spitting and cursing like a cornered snake, was bound in silver chains. He shifted back, the aches in his body nothing compared to the soaring pride in his soul. He ignored the council, ignored the priests, ignored the chaos. He walked straight to Lisa, who was leaning against the throne, pale and shaking, her eyes wide with the shock of what she had just done. He took her hands in his. They were trembling. He raised them to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently, a silent act of reverence. Then he turned, his mate still at his side, and faced his people. His voice boomed, filled with a power and passion they had never heard from him before. "For generations we have been wrong," he declared, his gaze sweeping over every stunned face. We have valued the roar of the warrior, but ignored the strength of the spirit. We were told a prophecy of a silent roar, and we looked for a weapon. We were fools. He lifted Lisa's hand, holding it high for all to see. Tonight you were saved not by my claws, but by her heart. You were protected not by an alpha's rage, but by an omega's resilience. The poison of treason was defeated by a spirit so pure it could remind killers of their own souls. This is your queen. Not because I chose her, but because the moon goddess herself has shown us that her weakness is this pack's greatest strength. In the quiet that followed, no one cheered. No one roared. They just stared, their old world shattered, their understanding of power forever changed, their eyes finally, truly, seeing the forgotten girl in the plain gray dress.
A few nights later, she stood on the balcony of her chambers, the same balcony she had once seen as the edge of her prison. Now it felt like a perch overlooking a world full of possibility. The air was cool and clean, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she felt like she could breathe. The door opened softly behind her. It was Terry. He came to stand beside her, not crowding her, just sharing the quiet and the moonlight. For a long time they said nothing, simply watching the stars. "I'm sorry, Lisa," he finally said, his voice low and laced with a regret that felt real and deep. "For ever doubting you. For my anger. When I thought I had to choose between protecting you and protecting my kingdom, I almost failed them both. I let my fear make me cruel." She turned to him, a soft, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time. "And I'm sorry I ever believed I was a poison," she replied. "I let my fear make me weak." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. "You were never weak," he murmured, his golden eyes full of a warmth that made her soul answer. "You were a sword being held in a sheath of woven lies. You just had to draw the blade." In that moment, under the quiet gaze of the moon, all the titles fell away. He wasn't the Alpha King. She wasn't the Savior Omega. He was just Terry, the wolf who had seen her when no one else had. And she was just Lisa, the girl who had found her voice in the silence. He leaned in, and this time there were no interruptions, no fear, no hesitation. The space between them burned, not with a sudden spark, but with a deep, steady flame. His kiss was a promise of a shared future, of a new beginning, of a love that was stronger than any crown. As her wolf stirred, not with fear but with a soft, happy purr, she kissed him back, pouring all of her newfound strength, all of her hope, and all of her heart into it. And she, the girl who started this journey in a punishment of a dress, finally, truly, felt like she was home.